Good morning. How we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And today is just going to be you and I breaking down a hand. This hand was sent in by Dan. This hand is from 2-5 Live Cash. And in this situation, we have to make some pretty serious decisions with an open-ended straight draw facing a raise, but the line's not over there. Because if we do just decide to call that draw, how are we going to play it in the future? What's the line look like? And when we do improve, how do we go about actually extracting the most amount of value? So let's check out the spot and see what's going on. Okay, so in this hand, it folds around to hero. Hero decides to open. Remember, we're playing 2-5 live. And unfortunately, I do have to mention this and gripe about it. Hero, why are you only starting with 300 bucks? I don't understand this. Even more so, you have a fish who's over there who has a full stack. Why aren't you at least at 100 big blinds? If you can afford it, top off. If you can't afford it, don't play this game in the first place. And I'm just being totally honest here. Here's the truth. Most people are going to do far better playing 100 big blind plus or working to get better at 100 big blind plus than they are by playing some weird 60 or 70 big blind kind of strategy. I'm just being totally honest there. If you feel that you truly are better at 60 big blinds than 100 big blinds right now, be working to get better at playing 100 plus big blind strategy. Seriously. It's the only thing I'm really going to say about this, but I do think it's really important. And again, this is not something that comes up super rarely when people send hands in. Too many people are playing short in situations where they probably shouldn't be. So enough with that. Lag decides to call us, takes position on us. We go heads up to it. Awesome. Go here. Hero decides to fire a c-bet for 24 into 37, and the lag makes a small raise to 56. So here, hero decides to call. And most people, when they're reviewing this hand, either now or later, they kind of just say, okay, well, we called, let's analyze the turn and river and go from there. But in my opinion, this hand really hinges on this exact spot because of the stack sizes. If we were deeper and we had a lot more depth to play out, this is very different. But especially as we're getting closer and closer to commitment levels because of the stack size, this is a very important situation to spend the time, review it, and say, okay, is calling better than 3-betting here, or could 3-betting be a higher EV line? So you may be wondering, how the heck do we proof that? Well, fold equity calculator would be super helpful. And this is something that, of course, you use off table. You don't use it in real time. But when you've run enough of these situations off table, you start to get a good feel for this stuff. So this is the free fold equity calculator we have over at Redchip. I would definitely suggest bookmarking it if you don't already. This is a great tool to use for your off-table exploration. Essentially, we just need 4 different numbers here, and then we can start saying, okay, is it going to be better to 3-bet, or is it going to be better to flat like Hero did here? In this situation, we need this number, so pot size before we shove right this moment is 117. Okay, 117, perfect. How much do we have to call? That's this number right here, so 32. Excellent. How much are we shoving for? Well, we set the effective stack, so 261 is the shove, and estimated equity when called. So we can use the 4-2 rule here, just because if we do decide to 3-bet here, whether we 3-bet to something like $125, $175, or just shove the whole thing right here, either way it's with a commitment mindset, right? Of course, if we shove, we know we're automatically committed, but even if we were to raise here to say 150 and the lag decides to shove over the top, it's not like we're going to fold. So again, do this with a commitment mindset. And again, this is kind of just what happens when you're playing with those smaller effective stack sizes. So I think it's fair to say that we're going to see all cards here, which means we can take our outs, multiply it by 4, and get close enough for estimated usage. So 4 outs times that by, 8 outs times that by 4, we're up to 32. I'm going to round that down just a little bit to 30, simply because when you're talking about commitment situations, oftentimes there's going to be a slightly higher density of things like 2-pair or things like sets in our opponent's range, and that can put some killer cards in there. So I always just kind of take my estimated equity, round it down just a pinch, and that's usually pretty darn usable. So here we go, put all those numbers in. Down below we see we break even if villain folds 40% of the time. Cool, but what does that mean? Honestly, most people don't really know what the heck that means. What that means here is that if we were to shove and our opponent would fold exactly 40% of the time, then we would break even on our shove. But of course, we want to make profitable shoves, not break even shoves, which means that I realistically want my opponent to be raising to 56 and folding if I come over the top somewhere between 50 to 75% of the time. The higher, the better for us, and that means that that's a great thing for us, simply because we're making profit in that scenario, not just making a break-even raise. Here's the honest truth. Here's what it's all gonna really rely on. it's this entire spot, whether you decide to 3-bet, whether you decide to flat, and again, flatting is the default here. Most people are just going to do it without thinking much about it. They're getting a great price. They have a draw. Most people don't play draws aggressively enough, and as such, the default is just to call the 56 and go forward to the turn. But I always want you to ask yourself the question, what is the value of going the aggressive route? Is that going to be higher EV? If you at least ask yourself that question, you're setting yourself up for more success. I promise you. The average person wants to take the default passive option, the one that risks the least amount of money, without thinking about the actual EV. I want you to make the highest EV play, not just the most comfortable one to your bankroll or to your money situation, whatever that is. So all of this hinges on two things. One, what do you think the $56 raise means? And two, how much of the lag's raising range do you think is realistically going to fold if you come over the top? Here's the thing. I think the average person, the average lag, when they raise here to 56, is doing this with a range of hands that they're not super comfortable with. Maybe it's something like 8x trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe it's 6-7 or Queen Jack, a draw that they're trying to set the price for. Maybe they're just goofing around with Ace Jack. Maybe they're trying to figure out what to do with 10-9. But ultimately, I think a lot of hands within that range are not going to be super strong, if nothing else because there's not a lot of super strong combinations available, right? Do you think the lag always calls preflop at 10s or 3-bets it sometimes? If you assume calls, fine. That's 9 combinations of possible sets right here. And if you think 10-8 suited is the only realistic way to make 2 pair, well, there's an extra 2 of those. So 11 combos of strong hands. I know we've been talking about that a lot over the last couple of videos, but I can't stress that enough. Most people have no idea how many strong combinations are available. And once you start comparing that to some of the other combinations that could be in there, well, that's going to change things pretty quickly, right? So in this spot, 11 combos of killer stuff? Cool. Well, how many combos of other things are realistically in there? If there's another 11 combos of possible hands in the range that you think the lag would raise fold with, well, you're already at a 50% folding rate. And again, we only need 40. So that can be a good thing for us coming over the top. The more you think that they're going to raise fold here, especially if you think they're ever going to goof around with 8x or any sort of pocket pair they turn into a bluff like pocket fours or any sort of draw that they might decide to raise fold with, that is a great thing for you and bends more validity towards taking the 3-bet line in this spot. So you notice it's all based upon what do you think the $56 raise means and what do you think is folding out of that range. If you think the smaller size indicates more strength because they would never go to a small size with a strong hand, or they would, again, that's going to be the linchpin of this hand. I know most people are going to flat here. I know in the comments most of y'all are going to say, well, you have to flat here because of course he's going to have strong stuff here. That's fine. I'm laying out my assumptions and comparing my assumption to the math. I think it's going to be more profitable for Hero to come over the top and 3-bet here. And I laid out all points why. You can certainly lay out a ton of different points and assumption strands where it's going to be way better to flat here. So again, it's all about the linchpin of what do you think the lags raising to 56 range means, how much of that do you think is going to raise fold? That is going to be the kicker here. So again, make your own assumptions. You can play around with that fold equity calculator a little bit and start seeing which line is going to be more profitable, flatting or coming over the top and taking the aggressive action. Alright, so after Dan calls the flop, the turn we improve, action goes check, check, okay, river's a 10, Hero checks, lag fires, and Hero decides to check shove. Okay, Dan says this in the write-up. He says, my thinking on the river is that he has a 10. Not a boat because he thought 2 pair and sets would bet the turn, especially due to his perceived image. Totally fair. And Dan says that if he didn't shove, he thought he was losing value. Okay. Dan also says that if he led the river, instead of checking it like he did, that he thought that the lag was going to fold anything worse than a 10 or an overpair, so he was always aiming to check and then shove over a bet. Is the shove bad? Okay, so let's break this down and really think about this. And I'm going to kind of crack back to the beginning of the river where Hero decides to check. Now, in this situation, I kind of disagree. I think that if Dan were to lead the river, he does get looked up by some hands other than just 10x and overpairs. I think that if the lag was messing around on the flop with 8x, again, one of those hand types that I was very cool getting him to raise fold on the flop, but I digress. If he did have an 8x hand, I think that the lag will certainly call your bet here, right? I don't think that he's always going to bet to you if you do check to him. If he has 8x, he could just take it at showdown value, but I do think that he will call, particularly if you fire for like 75 or 80 bucks. I think you're getting looked up by 8x pretty much every day of the week, and there are a bunch of different ways the lag could make 8x at least pre-flop, but whether or not you think a lot of them are in there due to that flop raise, well, that's certainly up for debate. So I do think you can get looked up by some second best. And another thing that I would heavily consider here, and this is going to sound a little goofy, but bear with me, is leading the river for about 40 bucks. Okay, here's why. If the lag wanted to bluff, why wouldn't he have done so on the turn? Right? Think about that for a moment. The turn did go check, check. That's why you have to look at an entire hand in context. We can't just look at a single street out of context. The turn went check, check. So if the lag wanted to bluff, why wouldn't he have bluffed there? And if that's the case, then why do we assume the lag is randomly going to bluff when the board pair is on the river? I don't think there's a lot of reason to think the lag has a ton of air that's going to do that. So I think that if I check to the lag, that he probably checks all of his air behind. Sure, we end up winning the pot, but we don't make anything extra. If we fire for something goofy, like 35 or 40 bucks, it looks so stupid and airy that it wouldn't shock me if the lag occasionally decided to spaz out, shove over the top, and try to rep a bluff that way. Because he's thinking, hey, you can't have a real hand, because what the heck would ever bet 40 bucks on this river here? And then he kind of loses his mind. And again, if you think that 25 bucks is the bet size that's needed to do that, definitely consider it. Always consider these little creative options, right? It's not that the creative option or the goofy size is always going to be best, but you'd be shocked at how often these little goofy sizes, or sometimes overly large sizes, can kind of trigger people to do some really interesting things that can turn out to be far more profitable than just always assuming that if you lead here, you have to lead for 100 or 1.25 or something like that. There are options outside of the normal, I assure you. So the thing is again, I don't see the lag wanting to bluff here a ton based upon how the hands played out, based upon the way the textures rolled out. I think that if the lag wanted to fire, they would have done so already, again, using that turn. So I don't think I'm trying to check here to induce bluffs. Yeah, if he has 10x, whatever, we get paid. But if we fire for a small number on the river, I think the lag still comes over the top with 10x, right? I don't think he goes into like showdown value mode with 10x all of a sudden. So I still think we make max value against that hand as well. And that's just kind of my general thought process here. Do I think that the check shove is bad? No, I just think it's suboptimal. I don't think there's enough bluffing happening from the lag here to like make this the better line than trying to go for the spaz out option instead. So that's just my general thought process. Yes, as played, unfortunately, we did end up getting looked up by 10-8, but there aren't that many 10-8 suited combos left. So again, I'm not super worried about that. Again, that kind of hinges back to the flop raise. Do you think that that represents a lot of hands like this, or even full combinations of that, right? There are some people who, if we go back to the flop, and they do decide to raise here with those 11 combos of killers that we talked about earlier, is it going to be 56 or is it going to be 75? Right? So then does the 56 number become a smaller number, not a full selection of those full 11 killer combos? Again, all things need to be thought about and taken in context. So again, I'm not super worried about this hand or the way it played out. This is a really good hand for exploration. I mean, sure, we're going to play draws aggressively and lose. We're going to play draws passively and lose sometimes, whatever. Don't get wrapped up in the results. Get wrapped up in the thought process and what's going on. And again, thinking about how the lag is going to bluff, both in terms of that flop raise, does that indicate a lot of bluffs or not? And then if he does have a lot of air, again, should we just play more aggressively early? And then if we don't, why do we assume that there's going to be a lot of bluffing on the river? And that can definitely trigger a bunch of different things in terms of your action, your checks, and if you do decide to fire, how can you increase the most amount of mistakes from your opponent? So I know this is a longer video, a lot to chew on. You might have to watch it twice because I know there's a bunch of stuff we passed through really, really quickly. But if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Thank you, Dan, so much for sending this hand in. I really, really appreciate it. Sorry for the result, but hopefully a bunch of this feedback helps and gives you some places to start exploring some of your other draws as well. And remember, this is all stuff you explore off table, so that way when you're in real time playing a hand like this, you have a better foundation of what to look for, what goes into playing the draw aggressively, and what goes into playing it the other way. So as always, thank you so much for hanging out. If you need anything, have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, as always, good luck out there and happy grinding.